And it's the biggest pre-budget interview with the principal economic advisor to the government, Sanjeev Sanyal, live with Rahul Kanwal and Sitharaman.
Hello and welcome. To talk about the economic survey that's been presented by the Government of India, we're joined by the man who brought this survey together. Principal Economic Advisor Sanjeev Sanyal joins Siddharth and me live and exclusive on India Today. Siddharth, this is the first time that Sanjeev has been involved as intensively as he has in the hands-on task of driving the economic survey process. He's been involved in inputting, but this is the first time, Sanjeev, you've brought the survey together, and it comes at a time of great economic uncertainty. We're in the midst of an Omicron wave. Hopefully that wave is now beginning to recede. Give our viewers a sense at the outset of the kind of calculations that you've done, the base that you've built, on the back of which you're projecting an 8 to 8.5% growth in the GDP in the next fiscal. Because one of the things I notice is you're hoping that there will be no further pandemic-related economic disruption. Now, that's a big unknown that you factored into consideration while you come up with these kind of growth projections. Sanjeev, welcome. How was this ride?
Pleasure to be on your show. Let me say that the forecast that we have put for the next financial year of 8 to 8.5% is based on a bunch of assumptions. Obviously, any forecast about the future is based on certain assumptions. And you mentioned one of them, which is that future waves of COVID, if any, will not be particularly disruptive as far as the impact on the economy is concerned. Now, obviously, it's an assumption, but I don't think it's an unreasonable assumption. Fact of the matter is, we have had very widespread coverage of the vaccination program. Pretty much the whole adult population has at least had one dose. Even now, we are going into booster doses in some segments of the population. So I think it's fair to say that the kinds of economic disruptions that we've had, particularly for contact-based services, will be anywhere near like what we saw in the last few years.
Sanjeev, one of the highlights of the survey, and for our viewers, it clearly says that the services sector will record 8.2% growth in the current financial year versus a contraction of 8.4%. So, services has been one of the better performing sectors, yet it needs support due to the latest disruption by Omicron. Had the government supported it more, would services sector growth have been better? Would the restaurants, the hotels, the gyms and other sectors of the economy have performed better?
So first of all, let me point out that in fact it is not the case that service is one of the better performing sectors over the last 2 years. The agriculture sector actually wasn't terribly affected and is now well above pre-pandemic levels. Not surprisingly, this is a sector that wasn't that affected by lockdowns and things like that. The industrial sector has also seen a smart recovery and in fact is now well above pre-pandemic levels. Even within the services sector, there are segments like finance, public administration and so on that are also above pre-pandemic levels. So the issue really relates to contact-intensive services, which includes obviously entertainment, tourism, travel. I mean, nothing very surprising. You could guess which ones they are. Now, obviously, those segments have a problem because all the impact of various kinds of regulations, lockdowns, etc., happens directly to them. And although they do, at least so far, they did recover quite strongly whenever we open things up. Again, you have this episode with Omicron where some impact would have happened, although the numbers of that are not clear. So the point is, yes, true that the contact-intensive segment of the services sector has faced a lot of issues, not surprising. But I think overall, the economy is now functioning above pre-pandemic levels, and you can see that whether you calculate it by GVA or you calculate it by GDP.
One of the fears, Sanjeev, that you're highlighting in the budget is about global oil prices and the impact that this could have on India. We're already seeing the stress, the strain between Russia and Ukraine, and crude is now $90 a barrel. The government has held back, even though you won't accept this on record, raising oil prices in India, petrol prices, because of the election. But once UP is over, come the 10th of March, given the fact that crude internationally is under pressure, would that then lead me to fear that once the elections in Uttar Pradesh and elsewhere are over, we could actually see a sharp spurt, which is in some senses beyond your control?
Well, we have highlighted the fact that international inflation is an issue. It's just not all about oil prices, but you're seeing high inflationary impact happening in developed countries, advanced countries as well. It's happening from supply side shortages in chips, container shortages of various kinds, and of course, as you mentioned, oil prices. Now, obviously, oil prices is notoriously difficult to predict, so I have not attempted to do that. While we are talking about $90 to a barrel today, let me remind you, just 18 months ago, that was below $20. So, I can't base my future views based on trying to predict oil prices. All that we have done is we presented what we think is a reasonable assumption in the range of $70 to $75 as a part of the assumption. And we have carried on. Now, obviously, there is a lot of unpredictability that remains looking into the future, whether it's geopolitics in Eastern Europe or East Asia or climate change and so on. And one of the themes of the economic survey as a result of that is not so much about forecasting the future, but it's about how do you make policy in an environment of uncertainty. And there's a very significant section on agile policy making, i.e. how do you deal with high-frequency data. There's a long section on supply-side measures, whether it's on resilience or flexibility. So I think the key message of the economic survey is, here is the forecast based on these assumptions. But we understand the world is uncertain. But so the real thrust of economic survey is about how do you make policy for this uncertain world, not about getting tied up with the forecast as such, but about how do you have responsive economic policy while maintaining certain amount of safety nets for the vulnerable sections and so on. So really the economic survey is about that. And I do hope you will read some of the sections on barbell strategy, agile, and so on. That is, they've given significant segments of that.
Sanjeev, one of the points that perhaps our viewers would want your views on, this is the third pandemic survey. The government, both at the center and the states, suffered huge revenue losses in the first year of the pandemic. It picked up in the second. This year, by all accounts, is a bumper year as far as revenues are concerned. What does that mean? Is Bharat Sarkar now finally out of the losses that it has suffered, and can it therefore be in a better position to spend in the future?
Since I was the co-author of the last several economic survey, let me say that this is not the third COVID survey. This is the second year into COVID that we have talked about COVID. The one in 1920 was presented in February when COVID was not really a major issue. So let me say that obviously we will be taking into account a large amount of evolving situations on various fronts. And much of what this survey does is talks about how you respond to unexpected turns of fate, so to speak. So one of the ways in which you deal with it is, of course, the use of fiscal policy. And the point that is made is that, as it happens to be, that the Indian government took very conservative and controlled approach towards fiscal policy, and that has stood us in very good stead, because basically where it was necessary, we went out there and spent, whether it's on safety nets of various kinds for vulnerable sections, providing free food or providing liquidity for MSMEs and so on, so that kind of safety net. But other times when the opportunity arrives where they could open up the economy, ramp up demand using capital expenditure on infrastructure and so on. So the key thing here has been the issue of agile policy making. And that has been possible because we have had the space to do it. And revenues reviving gives us, again, space to respond where necessary. We can use other policies too. The monetary policy is also there, and that was used too. We have supply-side measures that was also used. But since you specifically mentioned fiscal policy, yes, that was also used too. But the key thing here is to respond according to the evolving situation.
Sanjeev, if you look at the data coming out from the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, and I know the government doesn't particularly like it, but it's the only thing we have available at the moment on unemployment. Unemployment is at a 4-month high in December. What we saw in Bihar recently was very disturbing. Some pundits have called it India's first employment riots, or unemployment riots, where you had some 35,000 posts in the railways and 1.25 crore people applied for that. What is your view on the current unemployment situation in the country, the restlessness of the youth, the inability to get jobs, especially on the back of the pandemic and the economic stress that's caused? In any case, at any time, employment is a huge concern, accentuated because of extraneous factors, including the pandemic and these riots that we've seen in Bihar.
So I don't want to comment on a specific incident. The fact of the matter is that, there's always been the case that whenever government jobs were advertised, very large numbers would apply. This has been true always, even much before COVID and recent events. So I wouldn't comment on that specific incident specifically. But yes, I mean, job creation is an important issue that we take seriously. What has happened as a result of it? Well, the data, as it suggests, is the comprehensive data suggests that there was certainly an impact on employment during the first lockdown. It recovered quite strongly, in fact, almost back to pre-COVID levels when the recovery happened in the second half of the year 2021. Since then, the overall data is not available in a comprehensive way, so we can use other proxies. What do the proxies say? Well, we have EPFO data, which suggests that formal jobs did recover very strongly, and have continued to recover quite strongly into this year. Now, some of this is maybe formalization, but I think most evidence is that there is also strong recovery in the new jobs also coming from there. So I think that source of jobs generation is happening, and it's a matter of keeping the economic momentum going, opening up the contact-intensive sectors in services, and allowing those growth to come. So this is not lack of jobs, this is allowing that flow to sustain. But on the rural side, the proxy that we use is, of course, Manrega data. Again, a very similar cycle is shown. There is a spike that happens during the lockdown. It comes down quite substantially. A smaller, a more shallow increase during the second wave, and then it comes down substantially after that. But it hasn't yet come down to pre-pandemic levels. So Manrega demand is still somewhat above pre-pandemic level. But in this as well, we need to be careful how we interpret it. So very often people will interpret this, this stress must be showing up in the migrant source states. So we looked at actually migrant source, we looked at the Manrega data state by state, and it shows something quite interesting, which we hadn't expected, which is that the source states, like Bihar, for example, actually have Manrega demand has actually fallen below pre-pandemic levels. And in many recipient states like Punjab, Maharashtra and so on, where Manrega demand has actually gone up. Now, I don't know what this trend shows, or suggests that more research is needed for this, but I'm just pointing out to you that a simplistic interpretation of the Manrega data may not be appropriate.
Sanjeev, a quick follow-up on that, and this is to you as an economist who's been outside government and now in the government for several years. Why does a large economy like India not have a comprehensive government-published set of employment numbers? It's not rocket science, and we excel at that, by the way. Why don't we have that as yet?
So this will have to be the last question, because as you know, I have to
one
move
more.
on to another interview.
One more and then last.
But let me say that Okay, literally one more after this. But so the thing is that, well, it actually is somewhat more complicated than rocket science, because there are many shades of gray in employment in India in general, because, there's a lot of informality. People are doing a lot of part-time jobs. They're working in agriculture part of the time. They're working in wage earnings, salaries in other time points of the year, and so on. So this has been a tricky issue for a long time, long debate on this issue. But oddly enough, this is actually going to become even more complicated into the future for not just us, but for the world, because when you're taking into account, for example, significant proportion of the workforce doing gig economy. Now, then, how do you define a gig worker as a worker or not? So there will be all kinds of complications on this data front. It's a longer debate, not meant for a quick debate on television like this.
Many people who are watching at this time, Sanjeev, are wondering what the government will ultimately do on regulating digital currencies. There was a bill which was to come, which was kind of held back. So we won't get into the specifics of what happens, but can you explain your thinking as principal economic advisor? Can you explain as best as you understand the thinking within the finance ministry on what would be the right approach and how to deal with cryptocurrencies?
Well, as far as crypto is concerned, this is a matter that is being debated extensively both in Parliament and in the Ministry of Finance. We appreciate the risks that many experts, including the Reserve Bank, has raised about to the financial stability and the impact of that. We are also watching keenly in what's happening to other countries, like what is happening in, for example, El Salvador, that adopted bitcoins. So we are very, very open. We are very, very cognizant of the risks to emanating from cryptocurrencies. At the same time, we appreciate that there are certain innovation-related benefits as well. So, let me not step in where, frankly, a debate is still going on, and I'm sure we will get a much clearer picture about our thinking in the very near future.
Okay, so as promised, last question to you, Sanjeev, and this is about imports from China. Ever since the Galwan clashes...
I literally have
one last question. Sanjeev, one last question. I know you need to bold, but one last question. So very quickly.
No, I really know nothing about Galwan.
No, hear my question. It's got nothing to do with Galwan. My question is on imports from China. After all the restrictions the government put in place on Chinese investments in telecom and elsewhere, one would have assumed that there would be a dip in imports coming in from China. Instead, numbers are going up. Why is that happening? How do you see that? And to what extent do you think we've been able to move away from importing from China?
So first of all, we can't wish away China. I mean, we do trade with them. We import and export with them, and they are an important part of the world economy. So we can't wish them away, and certainly not in any short time frame. What we can do is not protect our national interests in various ways. For example, by not participating in RCEP, for example. So we have built some ways in which to protect our national interests, but at the same time, we can't wish away the fact that China is an important part of the world economy, and we have to engage with them at the same time. So that is where we are at. It's an evolving thing in which obviously we will take in the longer run. Hopefully, we will be able to build enough capacities for certain inputs for which we are dependent on not just China but other countries as well. There's a lot of effort, as you know, on Atmanirbhar Bharat and others, creating chip capacities in India, pharmaceutical ingredients. But obviously, these capacities don't pop up overnight. You have to build them and inculcate them. So this takes time. And even after doing all of that, it is not the case that we will not be dealing with China in economic terms. It is a very important part of the world economy. And even then, we will have to deal with it. The key thing is, do we or do we not have enough bulwarks in order to be able to defend our national interests? And I will argue that we are slowly but steadily building in that direction.
Okay, we know you've had a long and stressful day. We won't hold you back any longer. Hopefully, we'll have you back after the budget. So thank you so much, Sanjeev Sanyal.
Thank you so much.
And we enjoyed that press conference. You were able to bring things together well, so nicely done. Compliments, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Slip into a quick break. We'll have more for you on the other side. Stay with us.